We spent another 4 days and nights on our bunker, mostly talking about our hometowns and families. Denny and I found out that Ray Hopkins joined the Army at 17 years old, under a threat from a judge at home that he had to join the military or go to jail for drinking and driving and getting into an accident. I heard this was a practice of many judges across the United States. Most judges themselves never were in the military, but they thought nothing of throwing a kid in jail or in the military that was at war. Ray was a helicopter mechanic like us, but had been stationed in Germany because he was only 17 years old. When he turned 18, he said he volunteered for Vietnam to help his country fight a war. And that led him to be on the bunker line full-time. Well, volunteering to be full-time on our section of the bunker line was not a good idea, as we were finding out. Apparently, many veteran infantry did not want to be full-time on the bunker line in our area. Our area had a lot of vegetation about 50 yards from the wire, which seemed to be a good attack gathering point for enemy. Figures new guys like us would innocently volunteer for this duty, not knowing the history of the place. All three of us were on top of our bunker one night at about 1:30 a.m. when suddenly we heard a funny distant thunk, 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 thunk noise to the front of us. We were trying to figure out what the noise was when huge explosions hit about 20 yards to our front and right and were instantly moving toward the top of our bunker. Our machine gun, grenade launcher, and rifles were lying next to us, but the instant explosions made us unconsciously dive into the bunker hole behind us without taking the time that we didn't have to grab our weapons. We found ourselves inside the bunker without our machine gun or rifles while the explosions were hitting the top and the sides of our sandbag bunker. Geez, things happened so fast that we didn't even have time to think. We were on just a reactionary mind trip. But we saved our lives unconsciously by diving headfirst into the bunker, although without weapons. We were feeling in our bodies the concussions of the explosions on top and around the bunker, and could hear the sound of the shrapnel zipping in through the front firing slit and smacking into the sandbags in the interior of the bunker. We were laying on the dirt floor of the bunker and couldn't even look up unless we wanted our heads ripped off. We all thought the same thing. Somehow we needed to get out of the bunker before someone threw a grenade or satchel charge into the bunker. The explosions seemed to be walking their way to the left of us, but still targeting the bunker line. We had detonators for some claymore mines in the bunker and pushed them, but to no effect. Then we decided that our best bet was to dash out and get our weapons. We dashed out, but the bunker was blown apart to a large degree. By that time, there were artillery flares dangling in the air and shooting coming from outside the wire in our direction. During a very quick search on our bellies, we found one M16 and a few grenades. We couldn't look around much at all, as any movement under flare light can be picked up by enemy riflemen. Our best bet to stay alive was not to move at all. We then crawled into the small trench to the right of the bunker and decided from there we would try to fight whatever might be coming at us. Then the firing from our front began to slacken and firing from our rear started up. But the firing from our rear was going back and forth and was all red tracers, which defined them as friendlies. Friendlies shooting at each other with grenades going off. Well, we couldn't fire on red tracers, as we might be shooting at confused friendlies already shooting at each other. We had enough problems at what might yet to come from the front of us. We were in a bad situation, but still alive and somehow unwounded. I had my knife and a grenade. We decided we had to wait in the trench until we could recognize who came close to us, enemy or friendly. Things happened fast, but the time in the trench went slow until daylight. Then we were safe. We gathered up what was left of our weapons and ammo. My rifle was broken with the stock blown off. The other M16 was broken also, at least enough so as not to be relied upon. The Starlight scope was broken, but the M60 machine gun and the M79 grenade launcher still worked. The engineers came out and gave us some more unfilled sandbags to repair our bunker with. We told the officer of the guard what happened, and he took the broken M16s and said that we would have to pay for them. We protested about paying for the M16s and said we needed new ones. We got new M16s. It was maybe our fault that the M16s were blown up. We had no slings for the rifles, but decided that we somehow needed to attach them to our bodies. The Starlight scope was broken also, and the officer of the guard said that it cost $7,000 and we might have to pay for that too. Geez, we never knew that the Army could be so cheap. We risk our lives, and when our weapons get blown to pieces, we have to pay for them. Crazy. In the end, we didn't have to pay for anything. Maybe the Army figured paying for the war with our lives was good enough. The engineers came out and gave us some more unfilled sandbags to repair our bunker with. We told the officer of the guard what happened, and he took the broken M16s and said that we would have to pay for them. We protested about paying for the M16s and said we needed new ones. We got new M16s. It was maybe our fault that the M16s were blown up. We had no slings for the rifles, but decided that we somehow needed to attach them to our bodies. The Starlight scope was broken also, and the officer of the guard said that it cost $7,000 and we might have to pay for that too. Geez, we never knew that the army could be so cheap. We risk our lives, and when our weapons get blown to pieces, we have to pay for them. Crazy. In the end, we didn't have to pay for anything. Maybe the army figured paying for the war with our lives was good enough. After being knocked around by the mortar explosions, my eyes would not focus right, and my hearing was very bad for days. Some more days on the bunker line passed. The days went by filling sandbags and repairing the bunker and the barbed wire area sweltering in the hot sun. The nights went by with the usual back and forth firing and flares going up. One fairly quiet night I was sitting behind the bunker while the other two were on top of the bunker. We had to expect attack from the rear sides and front as guys on bunkers were being knifed to death by being stabbed in the throat during the night. It happened to some of the guys on bunkers to the left and to the right of us. The place must be crawling with VC at night, we thought. Anyway, while I was guarding our rear, I heard a very faint noise that sounded like scraping, and after listening a while to it, I decided that it was coming from underground. I then whispered to Denny to come down and listen, and asked if he heard anything. He said he heard a scraping noise that seemed to be underground. We never heard of the famous Coochie tunnels at that time. It was March 1968. Maybe someone knew about them, but if they did, they never told us about them. And we were the ones who should be told. Actually, everyone in the base should have been made aware of our huge problem of a huge VC ant hive under our base camp. We listened to the scraping noise all night, and in the morning we told the officer of the guard what we heard. He called out the engineers, and they brought out a backhoe and started to dig about where we heard the scrapping noise. They found a tunnel about 4 feet down. It seemed the engineers didn't want to crawl into the tunnel and see where it started from. The tunnel was narrow and small, and only one guy at a time could fit into it. So they decided to get some Bangalore torpedoes and fit a bunch of them together and force them forward to blow the tunnel up. This they did. One could see from the collapse of the tunnel that the tunnel reached outside of our barbed wire. Not good. How many other tunnels were under our perimeter? The engineers were in charge of that situation and apparently found to some extent the huge VC colony that was under our base camp. I found out 30 years later that a lot of these tunnels under Coochie were built during the French occupation and their war against the Viet Minh from 1946 to 1954. We just built our big army base camp right on top of the huge Viet Minh tunnel system. So much for army intelligence. And it proved just how well the Vietnamese people stuck together in not telling the United States invaders all about the tunnels. Pretty much most adults had knowledge of running underground through Coochie province and under our base camp. The tunnel being constructed under us at the time was just a new add-on. Oh. And where did my two elderly Vietnamese friends go once the backhoe dug up the tunnel? I heard later that there was a new rule that said all Vietnamese civilians that worked on Coochie base camp had to leave by late afternoon and not enter again until next morning. I think someone with brains figured out what was going on with the tunnels. I was very friendly and generous toward the two older Vietnamese workers that lived under a piece of plywood supported by two 55-gallon empty drums. Did they save our lives on our bunker? As I thought about it all, they very well could have been ex-Viet Minh soldiers who fought the French during the 1946 to 1954 war. They could actually have been Viet Cong officers in this war, checking things out in our base camp as road repairers and feces burners. I was nice to them, and they may have been nice to us. During our time on our bunker, the bunkers around us had people killed by knife stabbings at night so as not to raise alarm or just to scare us for morale purposes. I doubt if the old guys did the killings, but they could have directed them. That's how life usually works. You do something nice for someone, and in return, they do something nice for you. Possibly in this case, the enemy saving our lives without us knowing about it. I have been generous all my life. My mother taught me that at a young age. In Vietnam, it might have saved 3 lives on our bunker. About this time, our area of the bunker line pretty much had flare light half the night. There was still the shooting back and forth, but not so much. The whole system of the enemy attacking from the front, and then all of a sudden that would stop, and then the fighting would be going on behind us when we were not overrun and all killed, led us to believe something strange was going on. About 3 times during night attacks during our time on the bunker line, there was an intense shooting from the front that suddenly died away, and almost immediately the shooting started behind us, but only red tracers were seen. And with the stabbing deaths, we figured the VC were getting behind us somehow differently than just a total wipeout frontal attack. I think all along that some Army intelligence people knew that tunnels were under our base camp, but word was not getting out about it. It was typical Army mismanagement. The whole Vietnam War was mismanaged from the beginning to end, and the people who knew about it were the guys fighting the war. The senior officers were not fighting the war. They were safe at the base, drinking alcohol and playing with the whores and making very, very stupid decisions that were getting the teenage and 20-year-old drafted and enlisted soldiers killed unnecessarily. We fighting soldiers figured out that the frontal attacks were a ploy to hide the fact that the VC were just crawling along tunnels and coming out behind us using captured weapons and ammo from our dead to cause confusion fighting them in the base camp. Along with our ammo and weapons, they had grenades and explosive satchel charges to blow up our helicopters, ammo dumps, fuel dumps, barracks, and virtually everything else. Once the sun rose, there were no VC or NVA to be found. They didn't come back through our perimeter to go outside the wire, so where could they have gone besides through the tunnel systems under the base camp? There was a big joke going around other Army camps that Coochie couldn't protect their own base camp from being constantly blown apart, not just by rockets and mortars, but they couldn't secure their own perimeter. Being on the perimeter for about 4 weeks, we knew why. Tunnels under us and VC in front, to the sides and behind us.